The morning began like any other shift, cool air drifting through the station doors, the low murmur of radios, the familiar scent of coffee and polished floors. Officer Daniel Hayes paused just long enough to stretch his shoulders before stepping inside, his boots echoing softly against the tiles. At his side, his young police pup, Ace, walked with calm precision, tail relaxed, ears alert but easy. Nothing about the moment felt unusual, until Ace stopped, right near the waiting area, beside a worn navy backpack resting against a bench. Ace sat down. Not playfully, not curiously. He sat straight, posture rigid, eyes locked on the bag. Daniel gave a small tug on the leash, expecting the pup to follow. Ace didn't move. Instead, his breathing slowed, chest rising and falling in a controlled rhythm that Daniel had only seen during training drills. "Come on, buddy," Daniel whispered, forcing a lightness into his voice. Ace's ears flicked back for a moment, but his gaze never left the backpack. A quiet unease settled in Daniel's stomach. Ace wasn't barking. He wasn't whining. He wasn't pacing. He was doing something far more unsettling, guarding, protecting, as if the world beyond that backpack didn't exist. People walked past unaware, while Ace remained still, like a statue carved from instinct and devotion. Daniel knelt beside him, heart beating faster now. He followed Ace's line of sight, studying the bag. It looked ordinary, too ordinary, and yet Ace refused to move. That's when Daniel realized this wasn't training. This wasn't a drill. This was instinct. Before we continue, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? The station woke slowly that morning. Fluorescent lights hummed to life one row at a time, washing the hallway in a pale, steady glow. Somewhere down the corridor, a radio crackled softly with overnight reports finally being signed off. The smell of burnt coffee drifted from the break room, mixing with the faint scent of disinfectant that never quite left the building. Officer Daniel Hayes adjusted the strap of his duty belt as he stepped inside. Another shift. Another routine morning that promised nothing out of the ordinary. At his side walked Ace. The young police pup moved with a quiet confidence that still surprised Daniel sometimes. His paws made soft, controlled taps against the tile floor. His tail hung relaxed, not wagging, not stiff, just present. His ears stayed upright but easy, catching sounds without tension. Daniel glanced down at him. "Easy morning, huh?" he murmured. Ace flicked one ear back in acknowledgement but kept walking. They passed the front desk, where a tired clerk gave a brief nod. A couple of early visitors sat on the waiting benches, heads bowed over phones, jackets draped across their laps. The station felt calm, safe, predictable. Daniel liked it that way. He had learned, over years on the force, to recognize mornings that carried weight. The air felt different on those days. Thicker. Charged. This wasn't one of them. At least it didn't feel like it. Ace slowed slightly as they reached the center of the waiting area. Daniel didn't notice at first. He was thinking about paperwork. About a call from his sister he still hadn't returned. About whether he'd remembered to turn off the porch light at home. Normal thoughts. Quiet thoughts. Then the leash went slack. Daniel took 2 more steps before realizing Ace wasn't beside him anymore. He stopped. Turned. Ace was sitting right beside a navy blue backpack resting against the leg of a wooden bench. The dog's posture had changed completely. His back was straight. His chest lifted. His tail was tucked neatly against the floor, perfectly still. His ears angled forward, sharp and focused. His eyes didn't blink. They were locked on the backpack. Daniel frowned. "Ace," he said softly. The dog didn't respond. Daniel gave the leash a gentle tug. Nothing. Ace didn't resist. He didn't pull back. He simply stayed. Like he had decided this was where he belonged. Daniel felt a small knot form in his chest. Ace wasn't barking. He wasn't whining. He wasn't pacing or circling or showing any sign of agitation. And somehow that unsettled Daniel more than noise ever could. He crouched beside him, lowering his voice instinctively. "What is it, buddy?" Ace's breathing was slow and steady. controlled. His nose lifted slightly, drawing in the air near the bag. Not frantic. Not rushed. Intent. Daniel followed Ace's gaze. The backpack looked ordinary. Worn canvas. Faded zipper. One strap slightly frayed at the edge. It leaned casually against the bench, as if someone had just stepped away for a moment. Nothing about it screamed danger. Daniel scanned the room. No one seemed to be watching. No nervous glances. No hurried footsteps retreating toward the door. Just quiet waiting. Mundane movement. A man scrolling through his phone. A woman adjusting her scarf. Daniel exhaled slowly. Probably nothing, he whispered, more to himself than to Ace. Ace didn't move. Daniel stood and shifted his weight, expecting Ace to rise with him. He didn't. Instead, Ace subtly repositioned his body. Just an inch. Just enough to place himself directly between the backpack and the flow of foot traffic. Daniel froze. That was no accident. That was training layered on instinct. Ace's ears flicked back briefly, checking in with Daniel, then snapped forward again. His gaze never left the bag. Daniel's pulse quickened. "You're not confused, are you?" Daniel asked quietly. Ace remained still. The leash lay loose in Daniel's hand. Around them, the station continued to breathe. Doors opened and closed. Shoes scuffed against tile. A laugh echoed faintly from somewhere down the hall. Normal life. But right there beside that backpack, something felt paused. Daniel knelt again, closer this time. He rested a hand lightly on Ace's shoulder. The dog's muscles were firm beneath his palm. Not tense. Ready. Daniel swallowed. Ace had been trained to react loudly when something was wrong. This wasn't that. This was something else. This was patience. Protection. Waiting. Daniel looked at the backpack again, this time not as an object, but as a presence. A quiet awareness crept in. Whatever Ace sensed, it wasn't about fear. It was about attention. Care. As if the bag itself mattered. Daniel stayed there with him, kneeling on the cold tile, listening to the steady rhythm of Ace's breathing. He didn't know why yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. This moment wasn't routine anymore. And whatever waited inside that worn blue backpack, Ace wasn't going to leave it alone. Time moved differently once Ace decided to stay. The station noise softened, fading into the background like distant rain. Daniel remained kneeling beside him, aware of every small movement now. The shift of air when the front doors opened, the muted thud of footsteps passing behind them, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Ace didn't react to any of it. His attention stayed anchored. Daniel studied him closely. The dog's ears weren't pinned forward in alarm. They weren't flattened in fear. They were angled, alert, listening, adjusting to something Daniel couldn't hear. His eyes tracked no motion. They held steady, dark and intent, focused on the backpack as if it were quietly speaking in a language only he understood. Daniel had seen Ace curious before. He'd seen him excited, playful, proud after a successful training exercise. This was different. This was stillness with purpose. "Ace!" Daniel whispered again. The dog's tail gave the smallest movement. Not a wag, just a subtle shift against the floor. A sign of awareness. Acknowledgement. But no retreat. Daniel rose slowly to his feet, testing the moment. The leash slid through his fingers as he took a cautious step back. Ace stayed seated. He adjusted his position again, barely noticeable to anyone else, angling his body more squarely toward the backpack. His chest widened slightly, creating a quiet barrier. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. That movement was intentional, protective. A few feet away, an older man stood from the bench, stretching his back. He reached down to grab the backpack. Ace's ears snapped forward. His head lifted. Not aggressive. Not loud. But unmistakable. The man paused, surprised by the sudden presence of the dog blocking his reach. "Oh, sorry," the man said quickly, hands raised. "Didn't realize." Daniel stepped forward immediately. "Sir," Daniel said calmly, keeping his voice even. "Is that your bag?" The man shook his head. No. I thought someone left it. Was just gonna move it over. Daniel nodded. I appreciate it. We'll take care of it. The man stepped back without argument. Ace didn't relax. If anything, his posture grew more deliberate. Daniel crouched again, lowering his voice so only Ace could hear. You felt that, didn't you? Ace's nose moved now just slightly. He leaned forward an inch, inhaling the air around the backpack. Slow. Controlled. As if memorizing its presence rather than investigating it. Daniel watched closely. There was no sign of stress in Ace's body language. No shaking. No panting. No wide eyes. Just focus. Which somehow made Daniel's heart beat faster. Ace had been trained to detect threats but also to read people. To sense distress. To respond to subtle cues humans often missed. Daniel had trusted that training. He trusted Ace. Still doubt crept in. The bag looked harmless. Daniel reached out, stopping his hand a few inches from the fabric. Ace's head snapped toward Daniel. Just once. Quiet look. Not warning. A reminder. Daniel pulled his hand back. Okay, he murmured. Okay. I hear you. Ace's breathing slowed again. Daniel stood and signaled discreetly to the front desk clerk. She approached quietly, her expression curious but calm. Everything all right? She asked. Daniel kept his voice low. Probably. But I'm going to check protocol. Just in case. She nodded immediately and stepped away. The waiting area remained unaware. Ace remained unmoving. Minutes passed. Each second stretched longer than the last. Daniel noticed something else now. The backpack wasn't positioned carelessly. It was upright, balanced, placed intentionally against the bench leg, not tossed aside. The zipper was partially open, not enough to reveal contents, but enough to allow scent to escape. Ace leaned forward again, nostrils flaring softly. Then he did something unexpected. He lowered his body, not lying down, hovering. His chest hovered just above the floor. Paws extended forward, chin slightly lifted. A posture Daniel had only seen when Ace guarded something fragile during training. Protect but don't disturb. Daniel's throat tightened. You think someone's coming back for it, Daniel whispered. Ace didn't look at him. He stayed focused. Daniel felt the room shift, not in noise but in weight. The sense that something unseen was unfolding quietly beneath the surface of an ordinary morning. A young woman walked past, then stopped abruptly when she noticed Ace. Is he okay? She asked softly. Daniel gave a small nod. He's doing his job. Ace didn't react to her presence at all, which Daniel realized was the point. Whatever Ace sensed wasn't about the people around them. It was about the absence of someone, about something missing. The thought settled heavily in Daniel's chest. Ace let out a low, barely audible breath. Not a growl, not a whine. Just air. A sound of waiting. Daniel glanced at the clock on the wall. 7 minutes had passed. 7 long, quiet minutes. No one had returned for the backpack. Ace remained. Daniel finally understood. This wasn't suspicion. This was concern. Ace wasn't guarding against danger. He was guarding a story. Something unfinished. Something left behind. Daniel straightened slowly, eyes never leaving the bag. Whatever was coming next. Ace had already arrived there first. And Daniel knew, deeply instinctively, that this moment was only the beginning. He stayed beside Ace. And together they waited. Doubt arrives quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in like a thin layer of dust. Almost invisible, but impossible to ignore once you notice it. Daniel felt it now. He stood a few steps back from Ace, arms loosely crossed, eyes shifting between the backpack and the slow rhythm of the waiting room. The station hadn't changed. People still moved in and out. Phones still buzzed. A printer hummed somewhere behind the front desk. Normal life continued. And that made it harder to trust what he was feeling. Ace stayed exactly where he was. Guarding. Still. Daniel checked his watch. 10 minutes. In training, Ace would alert within seconds if something posed a threat. Bark. Sit. Signal. Escalate. But this stretch time. Daniel exhaled through his nose and rubbed a hand along his jaw. Maybe you're reading too much into it, he murmured under his breath. He crouched again, trying to see the bag the way anyone else would. Canvas. Scuffed corners. No wires. No ticking. No smell of chemicals. Just fabric and the faint scent of something familiar. Laundry soap, maybe. Old paper. Human things. Daniel glanced at Ace. The dog's ears flicked at the sound of a nearby door opening, then settled again. His focus never wavered. His posture never softened. Daniel reached for the leash. Not pulling. Just a light suggestion. Ace, he said gently. Come on. The leash moved. Ace did not. Daniel felt a flush of embarrassment rise in his chest. A few people were watching now. Not staring, just curious glances. The quiet kind that ask questions without words. Daniel straightened and smiled politely at a woman passing by. He's still young, Daniel said lightly. Gets fixated sometimes. The words felt wrong as soon as they left his mouth. Ace had never fixated like this. Daniel knelt again, closer now, lowering his voice. Buddy, he whispered. You're sure? Ace finally turned his head toward him. Just once. Their eyes met. And in that moment Daniel felt something shift. There was no confusion there. No uncertainty. Only calm conviction. Ace's tail tapped the floor once. Then he turned back to the backpack. Daniel swallowed hard. He stood again and took a step toward the bag, this time more deliberately. He bent at the waist, examining the zipper, the seams, the straps. Nothing. No sign of urgency. No obvious explanation. Daniel's rational mind pushed forward. This is a public place. Someone probably stepped out. You're projecting meaning onto normal behavior. He reached out again. Ace rose instantly. Not fast. Not aggressive. But decisive. He placed his body directly between Daniel and the backpack, standing tall now, legs firm, head level with Daniel's knee. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply blocked the space. Daniel froze. Ace, Daniel said, firmer this time. The dog didn't move. Around them the room seemed to notice. A conversation quieted. Footsteps slowed. Eyes lingered longer. Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. This was getting uncomfortable. He glanced toward the front desk again. The clerk watched him carefully, concern replacing curiosity. Daniel straightened, forcing a steady breath. All right, he said quietly. Let's reset. He stepped back and waited. Counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. Ace remained planted. Daniel felt the weight of the badge on his chest. Protocol mattered. But so did judgment. And judgment, he realized, wasn't always about visible evidence. Sometimes it was about trust. Still doubt clung stubbornly. He thought of training evaluations, of supervisors, of the fine line between intuition and overreaction. He imagined the report. Officer delayed station flow due to dog fixation on unattended property. No threat found. He could already hear the sighs. Daniel rubbed his temples and let out a slow breath. Okay, he whispered. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're wrong. Ace's ears tilted back briefly at the sound of Daniel's voice. Not in fear. In concern. That nearly broke him. Daniel crouched again, this time sitting back on his heels. What if I move it just a little? He asked softly, as if reasoning with a partner rather than a dog. Just to clear the walkway? Ace leaned forward. Not blocking. Not reacting. Just watching. Daniel reached toward the strap. Ace let out a soft, breathy sound. Not a growl. Not a whine. A warning shaped like care. Daniel pulled his hand back immediately. His heart was pounding now. This wasn't disobedience. This was communication. And suddenly, Daniel understood what had been bothering him all along. Ace wasn't telling him something was wrong. Ace was telling him something was important. Daniel looked around the waiting area again. He noticed details he'd ignored before. The bench seat was still warm. A disposable coffee cup sat beneath it, untouched. Steam long gone. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. Daniel stood slowly, resolve settling into his bones. Doubt still lingered, but it no longer led. Ace shifted slightly, relaxing just enough to know he'd been heard. Daniel placed a hand on Ace's back, steady and warm. "All right," Daniel said quietly. "We'll do this your way." Ace stayed beside the backpack, waiting. And in that stillness, Daniel realized something important. Sometimes the hardest signal to trust is the one that asks you to be patient. The shift was subtle at first. So subtle that anyone not watching closely might have missed it entirely. Ace adjusted his stance, just a fraction. His paws spread a little wider against the tile. His shoulders squared. His body angled more deliberately toward the backpack, while still keeping one side open toward Daniel, a quiet acknowledgement of partnership. Daniel noticed. His pulse quickened, not from fear but from recognition. This was escalation. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The waiting area grew busier as the morning wore on. A mother and child stepped inside, the boy tugging at her sleeve. A man in a work jacket paced near the doors, phone pressed to his ear. 2 officers passed through, exchanging quick nods as they headed down the hall. Ace tracked none of them. They passed within feet of him. Nothing. Then someone drifted too close to the bench. Ace shifted. 1 step. Enough to block. The man stopped short, startled by the sudden, silent presence of the dog. "Oh, sorry," he muttered. Daniel intervened smoothly. "We'll need to keep this area clear for a moment, sir." No explanation. Just calm authority. The man nodded and stepped away. Ace remained standing now. Still silent. Still steady. But no longer passive. Daniel felt the air thicken again. That strange sensation of a moment stretching beyond its edges. He glanced at the clock. 20 minutes. Too long for coincidence. Ace lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he drew in another careful breath near the bag. His ears rotated, scanning sounds beneath sounds. Footsteps layered over distant sirens, voices overlapping with the hum of the building. Then he did something Daniel hadn't seen before. Ace sat again, but not beside the backpack. In front of it. Fully. Deliberately. His body became a barrier. Daniel's stomach tightened. "Ace," he whispered. The dog didn't look back this time. Daniel moved closer, crouching again. He placed his hand near Ace's shoulder, not touching, waiting for permission. Ace leaned into the contact slightly. Grounding. Daniel exhaled. "You're sure?" Daniel said quietly. Ace's tail thumped once. Soft. Final. Daniel straightened and raised a hand toward the front desk. The clerk approached again, slower now, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want me to call it in?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. The word call carried weight. Protocols triggered chains of response. Attention. Scrutiny. He looked down at Ace. The dog's breathing had changed. Still calm but deeper. Measured. Like he was bracing not for danger but for responsibility. "Yes," Daniel said at last. "Let's notify supervision." Quietly. She nodded and moved away. The waiting area sensed it now. Not panic, but awareness. Conversations dropped in volume. People shifted closer to walls. The energy changed like a collective inhale being held. Ace remained motionless. A woman approached Daniel cautiously. "Is something wrong?" she asked, concern softening her features. Daniel kept his tone gentle. "We're just checking on an unattended item. Thank you for your patience." She nodded and guided her child a few steps back. Ace didn't react. Daniel noticed something else now. Something that sent a chill through him. The backpack moved. Not on its own, but from the gentle current of air as the doors opened, causing one loose strap to sway. Ace reacted instantly. Not with alarm. With precision. His head lifted. His ears locked forward. His body leaned. Ready but restrained. Daniel's heart jumped. "It's okay," Daniel whispered, unsure if he was speaking to Ace or himself. Ace's gaze softened slightly, but he didn't sit back down. The intensity remained. A supervisor arrived quietly and stood beside Daniel. "What we got?" she asked under her breath. Daniel gestured subtly. "My partner hasn't left that bag for half an hour. He's not signaling threat, but he's guarding it." She watched Ace carefully. Experienced eyes. "He's not anxious," she observed. "He's focused." Daniel nodded. "Exactly." They stood in silence for a moment. Ace lowered his head again, nose hovering near the zipper. He inhaled slowly, then paused. His ears flicked. He tilted his head. Then he looked up at Daniel. This time he held the gaze longer. There was something new there. Urgency, but still gentleness. Daniel felt it land deep in his chest. "Someone's connected to this," Daniel said quietly. "Someone vulnerable." The supervisor exhaled softly. "All right. Let's handle this carefully." A perimeter was established, subtle, respectful. People were redirected calmly. No alarms. No raised voices. Ace remained at the center of it all. Still. Steady. The backpack sat untouched. Time stretched. Then a sound. So faint Daniel almost missed it. A soft, muffled movement. Not mechanical. Not sharp. Organic. Ace heard it instantly. His ears snapped forward. His body leaned closer, protective, not aggressive. His tail lifted just slightly. Daniel's breath caught. "Did you hear that?" the supervisor whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. Ace sat again, directly in front of the backpack, as if saying, "I've got this." Daniel's heart pounded, but his voice stayed calm. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, buddy. I'm with you." Ace didn't look away. Whatever was coming next was no longer abstract. No longer theoretical. Something real was there. Something alive. And Ace had known it all along. The behavior hadn't intensified out of fear. It had deepened out of care. And in that quiet waiting room surrounded by everyday life and ordinary sounds, a silent truth waited to be discovered. Silence settled differently now. Not the comfortable kind that belonged to early mornings and shared spaces, but a careful silence. A listening silence. Daniel knelt beside Ace again, slow and deliberate, as if the floor itself might startle whatever waited inside that backpack. His hand hovered just above Ace's shoulder, feeling the steady warmth radiating from the dog's body. Ace didn't tremble. He didn't tense. He breathed. Slow. Even. Present. The supervisor raised a hand, signaling for the nearby officers to hold their positions. No one spoke. The waiting area had thinned out quietly, people guided away without explanation, their curiosity replaced by an unspoken respect for the moment unfolding. Daniel leaned closer. And then he heard it again. A sound so soft it almost felt imagined. A tiny shift. A faint rustle. Something brushing fabric from the inside. Not metal. Not electronics. Life. Daniel's chest tightened. He swallowed, then spoke in a low voice meant only for Ace. "You knew," he whispered. Ace's ears flicked back briefly, acknowledgement, then returned forward attentive. His nose lowered closer to the zipper, inhaling gently, carefully, as if afraid to disturb what he'd been protecting all this time. Daniel reached out, this time not toward the bag, but toward the zipper pull. He paused, looked at Ace. Ace didn't block him now. He didn't shift. He didn't stop him. He simply stayed close, ready. Daniel took that as permission. With 2 fingers he eased the zipper open another inch. The sound felt impossibly loud. Everyone froze. Daniel leaned closer and peered inside. At first he saw only shadow. Then a small movement. Then a face. A child's face. Daniel sucked in a sharp breath and immediately stilled himself, careful not to react too quickly. The child couldn't have been more than a few months old. Wrapped in layers of soft blankets, cheeks flushed, eyes half open in the drowsy way of someone who didn't yet understand the world enough to fear it. A baby. Alive. Warm. Ace let out a soft breath beside him, a sound of relief shaped like confirmation. Daniel felt his eyes burn. "Hey!" he whispered instinctively. "Hey there." The baby shifted slightly, letting out the faintest whimper before settling again. Ace lowered himself carefully, lying down beside the bag now, his body curved protectively around it. Not touching. Just there. A living shield. The supervisor knelt beside Daniel, her expression breaking into something raw and human. "Oh my God," she breathed. Daniel nodded, unable to speak yet. The backpack wasn't abandoned. It was placed. Carefully. Intentionally. Someone had brought the baby here. Not to disappear, but to be found. Daniel scanned the contents gently now. A folded note tucked into the side pocket, a small bottle, diapers, and knitted cap. Everything clean. Everything thoughtful. Love wrapped in desperation. Ace's tail tapped the floor once. Soft. Satisfied. Daniel unfolded the note with trembling fingers. He didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. The words were heavy enough just being there. "Please help. I didn't know where else to go. I just want them safe." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Around them, the station seemed to exhale. The supervisor quietly radioed for medical assistance, her voice calm, controlled, professional. But her eyes stayed on the baby, softened with something deeper. Daniel carefully lifted the baby from the backpack, cradling the small body close to his chest. The infant stirred, then relaxed again, breathing warm air against Daniel's uniform. Ace rose immediately and pressed close to Daniel's side, head lifted, eyes scanning the room. Protective. Present. "You did good," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking just slightly. "You did so good." Ace leaned into him gently. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance, approaching, not urgent. Just support arriving. The supervisor placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. If he hadn't noticed. Daniel shook his head slowly. He noticed. Ace sat down again, positioning himself beside Daniel's leg, eyes returning briefly to the empty backpack, as if making sure nothing had been left behind. Daniel looked down at him, awe settling deep in his chest. Ace hadn't sensed danger. He'd sensed responsibility. A quiet plea. A life that couldn't speak for itself yet. As medical staff arrived, the room filled with movement again, careful, respectful movement. A blanket was draped around the baby. Gentle hands checked vitals. Soft reassurances filled the air. Ace stayed close through it all. Never anxious. Never overwhelmed. Just there. When the baby was finally placed into the arms of a paramedic, Ace watched intently, ears forward, head tilted slightly. Only when the child was fully secure did his posture relax. His job complete. Daniel rose slowly, legs stiff, heart full. He looked at the backpack one last time. Now just an object again, emptied of its secret. But the meaning lingered. Ace had turned an ordinary morning into something sacred. In a place built for order and enforcement, he had found compassion. And Daniel knew, as deeply as he'd ever known anything, that this was the kind of moment that changed you. Quietly. Forever. The ambulance doors closed with a soft, final sound. Not a slam. Not an ending. A beginning. Daniel stood just outside the station entrance, arms folded loosely across his chest, watching as the vehicle pulled away into the slow rhythm of morning traffic. Its lights stayed off. No sirens. No urgency. That detail mattered. It meant the baby was stable. Safe. Beside him, Ace sat calmly, gaze following the ambulance until it disappeared around the corner. Only then did the dog exhale fully, a long breath that seemed to empty something he'd been holding since the moment he'd first sat beside that backpack. Daniel noticed. He always did now. "You can rest," Daniel murmured. Ace's ears relaxed slightly. Inside the station, the waiting area felt different. Not tense anymore. Tender. People spoke in lower voices. Strangers exchanged quiet looks, the kind that carry shared understanding without explanation. The front desk clerk wiped her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Daniel turned back inside. The backpack had been moved to an evidence table, open now, harmless. A small blanket lay folded beside it, patterned with faded yellow stars. Daniel stared at it longer than necessary. That was when it hit him. The courage it must have taken to leave that child behind. The fear. The love. Ace nudged Daniel's hand gently, pulling him back to the present. I know, Daniel whispered. I know. A social worker arrived not long after, calm, composed, eyes already soft with compassion. She spoke quietly with the supervisor, nodding as details were shared. No identifying documents? She asked. Just a note, the supervisor replied. And care items. Whoever did this. They wanted the baby found quickly. The social worker glanced down at Ace. He stayed with the bag? She asked. Daniel nodded. From the moment we walked in. She crouched slightly, careful not to overwhelm the dog. Thank you, she said softly, as if Ace could understand every word. Ace tilted his head once, then sat, as if he did. Later that morning, Daniel found himself at the hospital. He hadn't planned to go, but his feet carried him there anyway. The hall smelled like antiseptic and warm linen. Machines hummed quietly. Nurses moved with practiced calm. The baby had been settled into a neonatal unit for observation, healthy, stable, wrapped in fresh blankets that looked impossibly white. Daniel stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. Ace sat beside him. The baby slept peacefully, chest rising and falling in tiny, perfect motions. A nurse noticed them and smiled. He's doing very well, she said gently. No signs of distress. Whoever cared for him before did a good job. Daniel nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Ace watched the baby intently, ears relaxed now, posture loose. His job was finished, but his concern lingered. Looks like he's got a guardian angel, the nurse added with a small smile. Daniel glanced down at Ace. Something like that, he said quietly. Before they left, Daniel stepped aside with the social worker. She explained the next steps: temporary foster care, medical checks, and investigation focused on care, not punishment. We're going to do everything we can to find the mother, she said. And help her. Daniel nodded. That matters. Outside, the sky had shifted. Clouds drifted slowly across patches of blue, sunlight breaking through in soft beams that warmed the pavement. Ace stretched, then sat again, leaning lightly against Daniel's leg. Daniel rested a hand on his head. You didn't save someone today, Daniel said softly. You saved two. Ace closed his eyes for a brief moment. Content. As they walked back toward the station, Daniel realized something else. This wasn't a dramatic rescue. There were no headlines, no flashing lights, no hero speeches, just a dog who listened, and a man who learned to trust him. Sometimes rescue looks like sitting still, like refusing to move, like believing that something quiet is worth protecting. And somewhere in a warm hospital room, a baby slept peacefully, unaware of how close life had come to slipping past unnoticed. Because one dog chose to notice, and wouldn't let go. The days that followed moved gently, not slowly but thoughtfully, as if everyone involved had learned without being told to handle the moment with care. Daniel returned to his regular shifts, but the station no longer felt quite the same. The waiting area seemed softer now, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Officers spoke a little more gently. People lingered a little longer before leaving. Ace had changed too. Not in behavior, in presence. He stayed closer to Daniel's side, not anxious, not needy, just attuned. His ears tracked Daniel's voice more closely. His eyes checked in more often, as if something in him had settled into a deeper sense of purpose. One afternoon, Daniel found himself back at the hospital. This time he wasn't in uniform. He stood at the same window, hands in his jacket pockets, Ace sitting patiently beside him. The neonatal unit hummed with quiet efficiency. Nurses moved in slow, practiced rhythms. The baby, now wrapped in a soft green blanket, slept peacefully. The nurse smiled when she saw them. You came back, she said. Daniel nodded. Just wanted to check. She leaned against the counter. He's doing great. Eating well. Strong lungs. Ace's ears perked at the sound of the nurse's voice. He lifted his head. eyes scanning until they landed on the bassinet. He relaxed. Daniel felt it too. Relief doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes it trickles in moment by moment. The social worker met Daniel in the hallway later. She looked tired but hopeful. "We may have a lead," she said quietly. "A woman checked into a shelter 2 nights ago. No baby with her." She asked about safe surrender options but left before finishing intake. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "She's scared," he said. "Yes," the social worker replied. "But she cares." That mattered. Changed everything. Ace sat at Daniel's feet, listening without understanding words, but sensing tone. When the social worker smiled softly, Ace's tail gave a gentle wag. The days turned into a week. Then 2. The station received updates, small ones. The kind that don't make news but change lives. The baby was placed with a temporary foster family experience with newborns. The mother was located. She was safe, receiving support. No charges, just help. Daniel sat at his kitchen table one evening, coffee cooling beside him. Ace stretched out on the floor nearby. Rain tapped lightly against the window. The house smelled like soap and old wood. Daniel stared at the wall, replaying the moment Ace had first sat beside that backpack. So quiet, so certain. "I almost didn't listen," Daniel said aloud. Ace lifted his head, ears twitching. Daniel smiled faintly. "I know. I did." Ace stood and patted over, resting his chin gently on Daniel's knee. Forgiveness, offered without condition. Daniel scratched behind his ears, feeling the steady warmth of him. "You trusted me," Daniel whispered. "Even when I hesitated." Ace sighed contentedly and settled back down. A few days later, Daniel received a message from the social worker. "The mother wants to say thank you. She doesn't want to meet. Just gratitude." Daniel read it twice. Then once more. He didn't respond right away. He knelt beside Ace instead, resting a hand against his chest, feeling the calm rhythm of his breathing. "You gave her a chance," Daniel said quietly. "Both of them." Ace looked up at him, and for a moment Daniel felt something close to reverence. Not toward fate, not toward luck, but toward instinct, toward the quiet intelligence that knows when to act and when to wait. Weeks passed. Life resumed its usual pace. But something stayed. Daniel noticed it when Ace paused beside strangers who looked tired, when he lingered near crying children just a second longer than expected, when he sat patiently beside bags, strollers, doorways, always aware, always gentle. Ace had learned something too, that sometimes protection isn't about stopping harm. It's about creating space for help to arrive. One afternoon, Daniel and Ace returned to the station waiting area. The same bench, the same light filtering through the windows. The space felt empty, but peaceful. Daniel stood there for a long moment. Ace sat beside him. No backpack this time. No mystery. Just memory. Daniel placed a hand on Ace's shoulder. "You taught me something," he said softly. "About listening. About stillness." Ace leaned into him slightly. They stayed like that for a moment longer, then moved on. Healing doesn't always leave a mark you can see. Sometimes it changes the way you walk through a room, the way you pause before acting, the way you trust a quiet signal when it asks you to care. And somewhere not far away, a baby slept safely. A mother found support. And a dog, unaware of the lives he had altered, walked beside his partner, calm and steady, carrying the simple wisdom that had guided him all along. Pay attention. Be present. Stay. The season changed without asking permission. Morning air grew cooler. Sunlight slanted lower through the station windows, casting longer shadows across the waiting room floor. Leaves gathered along the edges of the sidewalk outside, nudged into small, quiet piles by the wind. Daniel noticed these things more now. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. Ace walked beside him as they entered the station. Paws steady, posture relaxed. The dog had grown, not just physically but in presence. His movements carried a calm assurance that came from having been tested and trusted. They paused near the same bench. The one where it had all begun. Daniel didn't plan it. His feet simply slowed. Ace sat down beside him, naturally, without command. They stayed there for a moment. Nothing happened. And that was the point. Daniel smiled faintly. Funny how quiet can mean so many things, he murmured. Ace's tail brushed the floor once. Around them life continued. Officers moving through hallways, voices drifting from offices, the steady rhythm of work being done. But the space felt warm, grounded by something invisible. A bond, forged not in urgency but in patience. Later that day, Daniel and Ace responded to a routine call. Nothing dramatic. A wellness check. A concerned neighbor. Ace moved with his usual focus, checking rooms, reading the air, ears adjusting to every sound. Daniel watched him work with a new kind of respect. Not pride. Gratitude. He trusted Ace completely now. Not just his training but his intuition. That trust flowed both ways. Ace checked in with Daniel more often, brief glances that asked, "Are you with me?" and always received the same answer. Yes. That evening, Daniel took Ace home instead of returning him to the kennel. The sun dipped low as they walked through Daniel's neighborhood, golden light settling over rooftops and quiet streets. Ace sniffed the air, tail loose, steps unhurried. At home, Daniel filled Ace's bowl and sat on the floor beside him as he ate. The house was quiet, comfortable, the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything. Daniel leaned back against the couch. "You know," he said softly, "people talk about loyalty like it's obedience." Ace paused, glanced up, then went back to eating. Daniel smiled. "But that day," he continued, "you weren't obeying. You were choosing." Ace finished and walked over, settling beside Daniel. His body leaned gently into him, solid and warm. Daniel rested his head back, eyes closed. That choice had mattered. It had saved a life. It had reunited hope with help. But more than that, it had reshaped the way Daniel understood partnership. This wasn't a handler and a dog. This was two beings listening to one another. That night, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. Daniel watched it trace patterns down the window while Ace slept nearby, chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm. Daniel thought of the baby, of the mother, of the note folded carefully into the backpack. Life went on. Healing continued. And somewhere in that quiet continuation, a promise remained. To listen. To pause. To trust what doesn't shout. The next morning, Daniel clipped the leash onto Ace's collar. "Ready?" he asked. Ace stood, tail giving a slow wag. They stepped outside together, side by side, into whatever the day would bring. Because some bonds are formed through years of work, and others through a single moment of stillness. A moment where one chose to stay, and the other learned to listen. That bond, born quietly beside a forgotten backpack, would remain unbreakable. Not because of what they faced, but because of how they faced it. Together.